Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, delighted to be talking Werewolf, Curse of the Werewolf with author, creator Rob Saucedo. Rob, thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on.
Glad to have you. I am liking the promo art behind you. It creates a nice aesthetic. Very nice. What drew you to the world of comics, first of all?
Uh, you know, I think I grew up reading comics. As early as I can remember, I had a comic book in my hands. Some of the first I was reading were the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle adventures that were being put out by Archie Comics. Loved that series. Graduated to, the X-Men and Batman and so on and so forth. But, comics have been in my life for as long as I can remember.
Now, according to your Amazon bio,
Mhm.
there's something about you like drinking out of like footprints of wolves and things like that. Like this has been a passion of yours for some time. So what got you interested in lycanthropy lore and what ultimately led you to create these books in this space?
Yeah, there was this book I used to check out of the library all the time called Meet the Werewolf, and it was like a nonfiction book for kids that introduced kids to the mythology of werewolves and lycanthropy. And I just was obsessed with this book. I would check it out of the library every time I went. I don't think I gave another kid in my neighborhood a single chance to read this book themselves. I've loved werewolves, and I remember in the book, yes, it said that one of the ways you could become a werewolf was by drinking water out of a wolf's paw print. And so I went out into the neighborhood in search of a wolf's paw print after a heavy rain. And, of course, there aren't any wolves in, suburbs of Houston, Texas. But what I was able to find was a dog's paw print. And I drank a little water out of it. I didn't become a werewolf, but I also didn't get sick, which I probably should have. So yeah, I consider it a win.
Yeah, you might have even built some immunity to something. Who knows? Who knows?
Exactly.
Now you have an artist working with you on the
Hmm.
book, and that is Deborah. Do I want to say that
Like,
Lanchinisi? Is that right?
yeah, yeah. Lancanessi, and
Lincolnesi.
yeah.
Okay.
I've met Deb through Facebook. There's this great Facebook group called Connecting Comic Book Writers and Artists. If you're, yourself a creator or you're looking to become a creator, I can't recommend this group enough. Basically, writers and artists both go on this group and post, well, about jobs that they're looking to hire for or be hired for. And I had written this script and knew I was looking for an artist who had a very specific style and tone. I had like an image in my mind of what I wanted the artwork to look like. And as soon as I saw Deb's artwork, it wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but it was what I should have had in mind from the beginning. She had this great cartoony style that was like a Scooby-Doo, but for adults. And so, I fell in love with her artwork and went back and actually revised the script to kind of better fit her artwork.
So, what was that collaborative process like? What's maybe a moment that stood out to you as you were working with her, where she brought something that maybe you didn't expect?
Yeah, so I had written the first book, Werewolf, as a novel during COVID. It was just a project to keep myself entertained, and so I had would write a chapter a day and share it with friends on a blog that I had been hosting. And when I was done with the novel version of Werewolf, I was like, yeah, this is okay, but I think it'd be better as a comic book or something. And so I immediately started working on adapting the novel into a comic book script. And when I worked with Deb, what I really found I loved about the whole comic book creation process is that it's a really a matter of like rebirth. Three different times. You write the script, you send the script to an artist, and the artist is going to reinterpret it completely, sometimes completely different, sometimes very similar to what you have in mind. And then the same thing is going to happen when you bring it to your letterer. Jack Morelli, who I worked with, is an industry legend. Worked with everybody from Stan Lee to Archie Andrews. And, when I worked with both Deb and Jack, they both brought like great ideas to the project that I never would have considered. And, together, the three of us really kind of birthed this whole idea into being in a new and exciting way, much different than the novel version I had first written.
Nice. Love that creative process and evolution of a piece of writing. And I am a fan of the horror genre. I've become more and more so over the past few years. So
Hmm.
what do you love about working in comics in this particular genre? And what's maybe kind of a challenge at the same time?
Yeah, so I come from a film background. I've been a film programmer for the last 15 years, and a horror genre, more than any other genre, is a genre of audience interaction. Your movies come to life when you're an audience and you're watching a movie, especially a horror film, with other people. If you feel the screams, the tension, the community terror, it all builds up. And so I fell in love with horror through film. But with comic books, it's a much different playground because you're not watching or reading a comic book with a group of other people. You're experiencing it by yourself in, a very singular experience. And I really, I don't think I'm the type of person who's ever going to write a straight horror book. Like, I love scary stuff. Some of my favorite films are things that like scare the bejeebus out of me. But as a person, like, I don't have that inside of me. I don't think I can just purely scare people. But what I love is I love monsters and I love comedy. And so I wanted to combine the two. And so, yes, I describe Werewolf as a horror comedy, but it's emphasis much more on the comedy than the horror.
With horror in mind,
Hmm.
quick question. There was a magazine that I loved as a kid, but I was always afraid to look at it. So I didn't want to look at it, but I really wanted to look at this magazine.
Hmm.
So first of all, is it Fangora or Fangoria? How
Fangoria.
does one Fangoria? Okay. So one
Hmm.
does want to pronounce the I. Okay. I was
Hmm.
wrong as a kid. Uh, you've worked in this space, so curious about any stories from that because the major cool points there. And then just anything in terms of kind of the love of comedy meeting horror in general that you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I've known the folks that are in charge of Fangoria for a long time now. Phil Nobile Jr. is the editor in chief, and Meredith Borders is one of the senior editors, and they're longtime friends of mine. I've worked and collaborated with them for many many years, and so when I finished Werewolf, they were the first people I turned to share the project with them. And Meredith was actually one of the co-editors of the book itself. She would help kind of copy edit and guide the book along through the process. And so when it came time to share the book with the world, I asked Fangoria, "Hey, would you guys be interested in releasing this as a webcomic?" They had never done a webcomic before, but they were very much into the idea. And so the initial version of Werewolf that was put out there in the world was a weekly webcomic that ran every Wednesday for about 3 or 4 months on Fangoria's website. And that was such an incredible experience, being a small part of Fangoria's history, being able to share the book with their audience. It definitely opened up the comic to a lot of eyes that wouldn't have read it in the first place. But more than that, it reminded me that I had a lot of responsibility with the book, that I had to include some scary stuff in there, despite my more of a love for comedy when it came to comic books. And as for the intersection of horror and comedy, the words I had in the back of my mind were coming from two different directions. One was Joe Dante, the director of The Howling, who read the book and really enjoyed it. But I kept remembering this quote he gave during it was on one of the special features of the Howling DVD I watched as a kid, and he talked about how horror movies are going to be laughed at regardless. People go to horror movies and they find something funny to laugh at. So you might as well give them something funny yourself. Otherwise, they're going to laugh at the things you don't want them to laugh at. And so, that was a big guiding light when we're writing this comic book. But then the other guiding light was Edgar Wright, who directed, of course, Shaun of the Dead. And his guide for writing a horror comedy is, make the comedy funny, but make the horror scary. And so that was a big part of what I wanted to do when working on Werewolf and Curse of the Werewolf is like, yes, it's funny, but when it does get scary, it gets really scary. And I think the secret to that is, not making the monsters the joke, or not bringing the monsters down to the level of everybody else. Have the monsters be scary and frightening, and have the comedy exist around them.
Nice. Uh, I believe I have one more question, unless
Yeah.
there's anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to include before we get to that question.
Yeah, no, I mean the big thing is like Curse of the Werewolf is just recently out as a sequel. It's a picks up directly from where Werewolf left off, and it involves a werewolf trying to transform themselves into a better person, as a human, while also becoming a worse part of themselves as a monster. And so, I really wanted to dig deep into the emotional growth that comes with getting out of your 20s and going into your 30s, but combine that with a really fun, rollicking monster adventure. I threw in everything. The first book is all about a werewolf attacking a furry convention, and that's very easy to describe to people. You tell them that premise, and their interest is immediately piqued. But when it came down to the sequel, I knew I didn't have that crutch to fall back on. So I was like, well, what am I gonna do? And so I have a werewolf fighting a killer whale. I have a haunted Taco Bell with giant man-eating chalupas. I put everything else I could think of into this book to try to make it as fun as possible for readers. So the second book just came out, and the first book is actually free to read right now at Global Comics. And so I really wanted to get people caught up with the story so they could check out the new book. So I posted the entire first book for free on Global Comics. Readers can go and read it, and if they enjoy it, go pick up the new sequel.
Very cool things. I love the creativity. What is next for you? What would you like to explore next? And where do we find out more?
Yeah, so I love werewolves. I've written two werewolf graphic novels, but I definitely want to take a little bit of a break before I go back for thirds. And so I'm working right now on a love letter to 80s action films. I'm pitching it as What Dreams May Come meets Demolition Man. And so if that kind of seems weird and unnecessary, that's exactly the tone I'm looking for. It's a kind of metaphysical action comedy romance, and so I'm hoping that I can finish up the script this year and get working with an artist on the artwork next year, and hopefully have it out to readers by the end of next year. But in the meantime, if you want to catch up and keep up to date with what's going on, go and follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Letterboxd. You can find me many different places. The website is werewolfcomic.com. That's where with an H, werewolfcomic.com. And you can find links to my social media, Deb's social media. Jack's smart. He's not on social media, but you can keep up with the creators of Werewolf. You can follow what we're working on. And I will tease this: there is a third werewolf story coming sooner than people might think. We're hopeful to be able to share news on that pretty soon.
Cool. Well, Rob, great to meet you. Glad to have you back anytime. May the
Yeah.
conversation and the creating continue.
Well, thank you. You guys are great, and I appreciate being on the show.